Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with a very cool figure because we are going to take a closer look at a Dinosaur King release. And I did review a few of these dinosaur figures a few years back, and they seem to be fairly popular. You know, people definitely like them. I think there's a big fan base for this line and the series overall, so I figured I'd bring it back. You know, I actually at this point have quite a few of these figures, a fairly decent collection of them now, so, I figured that some reviews of them wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. And today, we are checking out one of the coolest species in the line because we've got ourselves the Majungasaurus, and anytime we have a Majungasaurus figure, I'm very excited about it, but specifically this one, I feel like is really cool because the coloration on it is so unique. And so much so that Schleich actually replicated it for their Majungasaurus, probably a year or two ago, maybe 3 years ago. I forget when that one came out, but they absolutely were inspired by the coloration of the Dinosaur King version for their release, and that's pretty obvious once you see that figure. But overall, I think it looks pretty fun, so as always, let's jump to a closer look and check it out from there. So starting up here at the head sculpt of our Majungasaurus, you can see it looks okay, not exactly your most scientifically accurate version of a Majungasaurus, but I don't feel like you'll find that at all in the Dinosaur King line as a whole, so we'll just go ahead and move on from the entire concept of scientifically accurate, because whenever I review these figures you cannot expect that. But you can see we've got a decent looking head sculpt. You also have some nice looking scale detail on it. If you get nice and close you can get a pretty good idea of the scale detail. Obviously the figure isn't quite as highly detailed as you might see on, many figures nowadays, but for its time I think it was fairly well done. We have a nice mixture of colors on the faces. You've got the reds, you've got black, and you also have kind of like a light gray, sort of bordering on like an off-white. We also have a green for the eye, which you can see right there. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually feature any pupils, which is a bit of a bummer for the figure. You will also notice that mine has a few scuffs on it because, I never collected these figures when they were first coming out. I've only purchased them years later in, used fashion, so they're almost always going to have at least a little bit of paint damage, which I've considered kind of, cleaning them up and fixing them up to the point of looking more like a new version of the figure, but I haven't really done that quite yet. But you can see as you move down, the dinosaur does have its mouth open. We could see the teeth in there. They're not really that great. They look a little bit iffy as far as the overall sculpting goes, and the paintwork is a little bit sloppy, which you can see. It's just like a little bit intense, I think, on the amount of paint that they've added, but some areas like that doesn't look too bad as far as the paintwork goes, just not the greatest sculpted teeth. We can see the tongue on the inside of the mouth as well. We have a pinkish tone for the inside of the mouth. You can also see the skin stretching there again as the dinosaur has its mouth open. We, of course, have that classic Majungasaurus bump here on the top of the head, something that this dinosaur, of course, would not be complete without. As you move back here, you see some ridges pick up and run along the back of the dinosaur. For the most part, they seem like they're all the same size. I don't really see very much when it comes to variation of size for those, but as you move down through the course of the neck, you can see again some fairly decent skin texture. You also continue to see that patterning that we saw in the face, where we have the red, then we've got the black, we've got that light grayish tone, then we've got black, and then we're back to the red, and then we pretty much at this point start to see that the grayish tone is basically like outlined by the black, and that's the way that the patterning works on the figure. As you move down here into the lower part of the neck, you see a whole bunch of creasing going on as you reach down into the body. You can also see the arms are sculpted pretty nicely, obviously not correctly placed or anything like that, and again, we're not really going to go too far into scientific accuracy for these figures, but you can see there are nails painted on the Majungasaurus. We also have 4 fingers, it looks like, potentially. Boy, he's really beat up here on the underside. And although the wrists are pronated, we do actually have articulation. It's a swivel articulation, so you can kind of move those around, which is pretty fun at least. But as you move back into the stomach, you can see again the scale detail and everything looks okay. At this point, it's kind of a little bit muted, I would say. It's just not as nice as we saw earlier on, but it's not too far off as far as the overall detail goes. But you can see again that we've got the light tone that kind of runs along the side stripes down, but that leads down and, pretty much overtakes the entire underside of the figure. Again, we've got quite a few scuffs down there. Definitely going to have to restore this one, I think, and try to touch it up. But as you continue to move along, you continue to still see that really cool patterning. Leading down into the thigh, you see a large stripe of that patterning moving down. You can see, again, more skin texture that actually looks really nice. I think the skin texture in the thigh is probably one of the nicer areas of the skin texture of this dinosaur. We can kind of make out the muscle definition, but it's a little bit obscured because of that stripe. As you lead down, you've got the knee right there. You've also got a nice calf muscle back here. And then you lead down into the foot sculpt, and the foot sculpt looks okay. Definitely sporting a different type of foot sculpt compared to what we often see, as usually you now see scoots running down the toes of any sort of a theropod, where we don't actually see that here on this one. But you can see the nails are painted with a nice glossy black, and we do have dew claws, and they are as well painted, which is nice because most companies like to miss those areas. Also, we have articulation in the legs where you can move them forward and back pretty darn nicely. As you lead out into the tail, that's the one area we have a last little dose of articulation, as you do have a swivel for the tail moving out. But you can see the ridges continue to follow along the back of the tail here, moving all the way out through, as they very much so decrease at the very tip of the tail. Very small amount of decreasing before they're gone. But as you lead along the course of the tail, you can see a pretty nice curve as it leads out, goes up, and then kind of curves sort of out, but like slightly down. But again, we have that still, that patterning and striping effect as you move out, again with the reddish tones, which looks pretty cool. Very different style of skin texture to the underside of the figure as well, compared to what you see elsewhere on the Majungasaurus, but definitely a pretty cool figure. It's obviously, like I said, not the greatest Majungasaurus figure out there, but it is still a Majungasaurus, and since these figures are pretty fun, it's a nice Majungasaurus with articulation, which isn't something that we get every day, but definitely a fun figure overall. Another thing that's not half bad about the figure is the balance is pretty good, for a dinosaur like this, you definitely see it being off balance and falling easily, but this one doesn't. It actually stands pretty good. And if I can recall correctly, I believe the other ones that I had reviewed from this line, the other dinosaur figures, were also pretty well balanced. So it seems like for the most part they have decent balance in this line. But as far as a size goes, lengthwise, let me turn it just a little bit, give you a better shot of the measurement. Lengthwise, you're looking actually at about 10 inches almost on the dot, or around 25 centimeters, moving toward 25 and a half, but not quite there. And then for a height, now this of course would be dependent on the way you position it, because you could position it up higher, but in the position it's currently in, around 4 inches or 10 centimeters, but you could completely reposition the figure if you'd like to. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, Robert Muldoon, and the Collect A human being next to our Dinosaur King Majungasaurus, and you can definitely see that it's not a huge figure, and in fact, for the most part, a lot of the figures in this line aren't really that big, and they're all kind of in a similar size range. So if you do already have some Dinosaur King figures in your collection, you'll probably have a pretty good idea of the size of this Majungasaurus, but if you do not, then hopefully these figures next to it will help to give you an idea of the size. For another size comparison, we also have a Mattel Velociraptor and Dilophosaurus, which you can see this Majungasaurus isn't a whole lot larger than those figures. And then to kind of just show you how they are very similarly sized, here is a figure I have reviewed on the channel in the past, which is the Dino King Megaraptor next to the Majungasaurus. So you can very clearly see that they're very, very similar in size. The Megaraptor is a little bit larger, and when I actually had reviewed that figure, I wasn't all that familiar with the Megaraptor at that time, so it's kind of funny now to go and look back at it, to see it with like sickle claws and stuff. Now that I know more about the species, funny to see how incredibly inaccurate that is, but that again is just another example of how inaccurate the line as a whole is. But you can see again for this one final comparison that these two figures are fairly similar in size. So this Dinosaur King Majungasaurus is definitely a fun figure. It's clearly not the best Majungasaurus out there. It's certainly not going to be an award-winning Majungasaurus, and at this point, if it hadn't won an award before, it's definitely not going to now because it's a figure that's been out for quite some time. But as far as the figure goes, it is just fun. It's a Majungasaurus, and it's probably one of the earlier Majungasaurus figures that I can recall, because there aren't really all that many out even today. Like, there really wasn't that many out when this figure was initially released. But again, for the most part, the sculpt is pretty nice, and it's fairly decent as far as a Majungasaurus goes. I think they did a pretty good job on it as far as what the dinosaur probably looked like at the time that the figure was made. The fine detail is fairly decent, but not really anything to brag about. It has some okay looking skin texture, pretty much the type of detailing you would usually see on Dinosaur King figures. It does also sport some articulation, which is pretty fun. You actually have 5 different areas of articulation, as you can articulate both arms, both legs, and the tail. And on top of that, you've got a very cool, very unique paint scheme for this one. And I would say in the line overall, it's probably one of the most memorable color schemes and paint schemes for any dinosaur that was introduced into the Dinosaur King. I would say the Majungasaurus definitely has one of the most unique and memorable overall. So this is another really cool figure for this line, and I'm very, very happy to have this one in my collection. One of these days, though, I need to get the Carnotaurus. That's one of the few that I really wanted that I'm still missing, which is sad. But in the comment section, let me know what you guys think of this, and also if you would like to see more reviews of Dinosaur King figures, because as I said, I do have quite a few here yet that I can review for you guys. So if you would like to see more reviews of these figures, let me know, and I will do exactly that. Otherwise, I will try to find a link to include in the description as to where you can purchase one of these, but your best bet is just to search around on like eBay and Mercari and places like that where you can find dinosaur figures. Of course, pre-owned ones, because yeah, I think that at this point, that's probably the only way you're going to get a hold of this. But one way or another, again, definitely worth picking up, and like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.